Associate editor Lindsay Marcello writes the story, and she talked with an expert, I believe in Wake Forest,
Right.
Who is very concerned that the piling up of all of these regulations, all the state requirements we've talked about, plus a federal requirement on pricing, I believe, that we
Yes.
haven't mentioned yet, is really reaching the point where it's just too much for people to get into the industry.
Yeah, that's right. Lindsay talked to Tanya Marsh, who's a professor at Wake Forest University, who is the nation's expert on the funeral industry and the mortuary business. And she notes that right now, even though the industry itself accounts for about $21 billion a year across the country, that the average funeral, if you're dealing with an internment, is about $8,000 to $10,000.
Wow.
Which is a lot of money. If you instead go the cremation route, you're talking about maybe $1,000 to $2,500. And more people, rather than having the traditional funeral in which you would have a wake or receiving at the funeral home and then a service the next day and then a formal burial, are having memorial services at homes, at civic clubs, and churches, and are foregoing that route and just simply having the remains cremated.
And that's less expensive.
Much less expensive to do so. Because otherwise it can become a burden on a family, especially if low-income families.
That changing norm, more cremations, has a business impact, and that's another one of those reasons that the professor who's the expert in the industry is saying that there's some really big business questions for the funeral industry that really need to be addressed in terms of trying to attract people into it.
Right. Well, I mean, there are state laws, for instance, that we cite some in the story. For instance, in Texas, you cannot take embalmed remains across state lines. There are rules and regulations that have to deal with what you can do with cremated remains, for instance. There are issues with what sort of sanitation levels do you have to maintain in an embalming area. There are issues of what you can do. How green does your casket have to be?